Information-fueled.
Opinion-driven.
This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
7:06 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Appreciate you being here and want to welcome on into the program Congressman John Rose, 6th Congressional District Congressman. Always great to have you on the radio program. Boy, there's a lot going on. Number one, you folks in the House of Representatives, just like the Senate, I believe, you had a classified briefing on the Iran bombings from Donald Trump, courtesy of the president. What did you learn?
Well, good morning, Dan. Thanks for having me on Nashville's Morning News. These briefings are always interesting, and obviously some of the details I can't share on the show this morning. But I would just say I think everyone, Republican, Democrat member alike, were impressed with the knowledge and the information that we received about the strikes that the President Trump had ordered on Iran. And, I would just say I applaud the president for having the courage and the insight to take on making sure that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon. And, every recent president has pledged that. But President Trump has, taken decisive steps to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Do you think that ultimately the president, he is wanting to negotiate with Iran, or at least he did? I don't know if he still does now, but he is allowing Iran to sell oil to China. He's allowing both nations to thrive if they can. And do you think that's the right approach, is allowing Iran to continue to buy oil from China, or is that worrisome because if they're able to get their economy back, they may start funding terrorism again?
Well, I think we can look to the president's first term to know how he will ultimately probably approach this. I think it is, and that was that he cut off the flow of oil from Iran to all of its customers, and in doing so, cut off their access to resources. And of course, by the end of his presidency, Iran was essentially unable to fund terrorism. Obviously, President Biden lowered those sanctions or failed to enforce them, and Iran was able to reconstitute, and as we know, ultimately led to the attacks on Israel and other terrorist activities all across the Middle East. And so, quite a contrast in terms of what has happened. I think the president in the second term has been trying to negotiate with Iran to get them to concede and back away from their nuclear program, and I think ultimately they were refusing to do so, and that's what led to the strikes in recent days. And so I think now the president will back away and give the Iranians at least a moment to consider whether they want to surrender their nuclear program and really do what's best for their country. The only reason that they needed to enrich uranium to the level they have is to pursue a nuclear program. And, we had made it clear that we didn't want that to happen for literally decades now, and the rest of the world had as well. And we noticed that their neighbors, Iran's neighbors, are not standing up for them at this point. None of their so-called allies have come to their aid. And so I think you'll see President now aggressively pursue getting Iran to give up their nuclear ambitions. If they don't, then I think you'll see the United States take whatever additional steps are necessary to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Let's talk about the big, beautiful bill, shall we, Senator? Or I should say, Congressman John Rose. There's you have it's being debated in the Senate right now. In fact, today is going to be like the vote-a-rama, right? Can you talk a little bit about? And I know that you're in the House, not the Senate, but can you talk a little bit about how chaotic it is in this vote-a-rama?
Well, it really is. And let me just begin by saying the One Big Beautiful Bill delivers the largest tax cut for working and middle-class Americans in history. And I think you need to understand it in that context, and of course does much more and delivers on many of the promises that President Trump made as a candidate running for office. And obviously the American people spoke loudly when they gave him electoral and popular vote majorities last year and sent him back to serve as president as the 47th president. So I think we need to get the job done. The Senate procedures are a little arcane, you might say, a little unusual, but the process that's going to happen and that we're seeing happen probably as we speak, I haven't caught up on it this morning, but is that Democrats and Republicans presenting amendments to the current legislation that's before the Senate, and that takes time. They get around slowly over on the Senate side, so it takes a while for them to vote. So they're going to just do this for hours on end until all of the amendments have been voted up or down. And so it just takes a while for that process to happen. As we know, yesterday the Democrats forced the Senate clerks to read the entire text of the bill, and that took several hours, I think 10 or 12 hours.
10 hours.
To get through.
10 hours, 1,000 pages.
Yeah, so maybe they need to bring in a speed reader on the Senate side so they could get through it a little faster. But so this is just some of the tactics that happen over on the Senate side. It's unfortunate to see both sides play these games. Ultimately, it doesn't change the outcome, but we're hoping that they get this bill through the Senate, get it back to the House, and hopefully it will be in a form that will still be close enough to what we did on the House side that we can muster the majority necessary to pass it on the House side, make it become law.
Is your side, in the House of Representatives, are you guys watching all of this, sort of play by play as it goes on and anticipating what you're going to have to do? Like, give me some behind the scenes as far as what's going on in the House. Because you guys, you got it over to the Senate and now they're doing what they're doing, having to deal with the parliamentarian, by the way. And eventually it's going to come back to you guys. But do you have a pretty good idea? It's got to go into reconciliation too. So just talk about what happens next once it gets out of the Senate.
Well, so we'll have a choice on the House side once we see what actually comes out from the Senate, and we can either just pass the version that they send back to us as it comes back, or if we can't get the votes, and I suspect you'll see Speaker Johnson bring the bill that comes back from the Senate, bring it to a vote in the House, and see if we can muster the majority necessary to pass it. It passed by one vote last time, so every House member likes to say they were that one vote that got it across the line on the Republican side, and of course we did not get a single Democratic vote, and I think that's noteworthy, Dan, because that means that every Democrat in Congress, in the House rather, every Democrat in the House was voting for the largest tax increase in American history. So you can just go, think about how politically that looks for them. So we watch it closely. If we can't get to a majority in the House, then that's when we would have to go to what's called a conference committee, where House and Senate conferees are selected, and they sit down and they try to hammer out a compromise between the Senate and the House. If that happens, then of course the bill would have to pass again in both houses. The conference committee compromise would have to go back and pass again with a majority in both houses. And so we'll see where we get. Obviously, I'm kind of partial to the House version. I think it did more good for the American people, but maybe the Senate can send us back a bill that's still good enough to get across the finish line.
Congressman, hold on. I'm going to ask you generically about Pell Grants and what's going to happen within this legislation regarding Pell Grants. Somebody asked me about that, and I'm going to ask you about that coming up. Got to check the roads real quick on WTN. Very good. As far as your weather goes, we do have a hot day today. High of 90, scattered thunderstorms as well. Going to feel like it's about 97, 98 degrees. Super Talk, 99.7 WTN. I had I thought it was interesting, Congressman. I had what Rush Limbaugh used to say as a seminar caller. And I hosted a national show last night. And so I had one of these seminar callers, which was actually really interesting because you just hit it spot on, where it's like, you Democrats, you realize you're going to vote for raising everyone's taxes. You're voting against a massive tax cut. You're not going to be able to survive that in the midterm elections. This seminar caller, he's a Democrat, swore up and down that this issue with the Pell Grants within the big, beautiful bill is going to spell doom for the Republican Party. And can you go into detail on what this is going to do to Pell Grants?
Well, so, and again, it's always dangerous when the bill hasn't yet passed and there's still Senate amendments being offered. So, you're kind of speculating about what the Senate will ultimately do. But the changes that have been being talked about would actually include $10.5 billion in additional Pell Grant funding if they become part of the bill. So that actually would fill a shortfall in being able to fully fund Pell Grants. But there has been some proposals to require full-time enrollment to receive the maximum Pell Grant. And so that would impact some students who might be taking a reduced schedule. And, the logic there being that, why give someone the full amount of a Pell Grant if they are not taking advantage of the full credit hours that they could be enrolled in, and thereby will take more time to get through school and possibly increase the cost ultimately of taxpayers, or, reduce the likelihood that that student actually completed a course of study and got a degree. So that, you can argue about whether that makes sense. And then there is a proposal to limit access to Pell Grants for students with higher income families or those that are receiving full scholarships. So again, there's a lot of play in the scholarship world with college students about last dollar scholarships. Should we allow students to get more than the total cost of their education? And so those are the kinds of proposals that are being made. There's been some speculation that these changes might negatively impact some students going to community colleges where there are less strict requirements about full-time enrollment, that this could run afoul and thereby cause community college students to be affected in a negative way. But I think it's a little premature to think about that. All of these changes are being proposed because of problems that are foreseen with the current Pell Grant program.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because when I hit him back with, okay, we can talk about Pell Grants if you want, but instead, I'd like to talk about all the other things that are positive in this bill. And there's I'm going to be honest with you, Congressman, there's some things in this bill that I'm not sure about. However, by and large, it all comes down to the tax cuts. And for me, I know that there's a worry with, increasing the debt and the deficit, that is a big issue. But, I had Senator Haggerty on the other day, and he pointed out, and it's true, that this is going to bring more growth to our economy. You give people more money back in their taxes, then they're going to spend more, then our economy grows. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely, and that's an important note, and I'm glad you brought it up and give me a chance to say that. So it is absolutely true. If you look at the overall impact of the One Big Beautiful Bill, obviously when I say the largest tax increase in American history, you could look at it the other way and say if we don't pass this, tax decrease, if we don't pass this on January 1st, we would have the largest tax increase in American history. And so the biggest feature of the One Big Beautiful Bill is that it provides certainty to Americans, particularly small businesses and businesses all across this country, about what their tax future is going to be. And there are a number of other provisions that also impact taxes, but ultimately what that will do is it will incentivize businesses to make investments because they're going to know what their future holds. The one thing that business needs is some element of understanding of what the rules of the road are, what they're supposed to do. And once they have clear rules and they're able to rely on those, then they're in a position to make longer term investments. And so some estimates would say that GDP growth could reach as much as 5%. And perhaps 3.5% over the long haul. And so when the U.S. economy grows faster, it generates more tax revenue. We already know that when these tax cuts, many of them that were a part of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, when they were fully implemented, they in fact did result in a faster growing U.S. economy, such that ultimately they didn't really cost anything. They paid off because the growth in tax revenue more than offset the cost. And that's what we will see happen here. frankly, that's what we are counting on and need to happen because we know we're in a deep hole. We can't cut our way completely out of that hole, although this bill, at least as we sent it to the Senate, would represent the largest spending cuts in American history. So starting to spend less, starting to bend the spending curve to get federal spending under control, that's an element of this as well. And we could talk all day about how it does that. But ultimately, we can't cut our way out of our problems. We've got to grow our way out of our problems. And that's really at the core of what President Trump's agenda is and his vision here. And that's why this One Big Beautiful Bill is so important, because it will spur the U.S. economy, allow us to grow faster, and ultimately generate more tax revenue and help us get, the U.S. budget under control.
That is such a great point, Congressman, where I work obviously I've been working in the private sector for years, and you just hit the nail on the head. I have watched company after company after company after company try to cut themselves, cut their way to profit, as opposed to trying to grow the company and grow their assets. And typically when you try to cut to profit, all you're doing is you're cutting your company to the bare bones, and then the product suffers. So you're right. The more that you grow these assets, the more that you grow the economy, the stronger it is going to be. And we'll leave it there. John Rose, Congressman, always appreciate having you on. And, good luck this week. It's going to be interesting. And I always appreciate your availability. It is 7:23 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7. WTN, and Joan Jones is going to, where are we at? I mean, it's time for the tease, right? Joan Jones, time for the tease. That's right. Joan.
You got it, Dan.
I'm
floundering.
You're on fumes
no, I'm
right
not,
now.
No, I'm not floundering at all.
No, I'm saying you're running on fumes. You've been talking since midnight.
I'm good. It's all good. You know what I say to you, KGB? That's what I say to you.
Burn. It's a good burn.
Is that a good burn?
Yeah.
That a good burn, KGB?
Yeah.
Good. Joan, what's coming up?
Kilmar Abrego Garcia's lawyers got what they wanted, and now they're asking a judge to reverse what they wanted. We'll explain coming up. Also, a big votorama begins in the Senate this morning. It's on the One Big Beautiful Bill. All of that and more coming up here at 7:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
7:37, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. And welcome on in. I want to say good morning to Hans von Spakovsky, legal expert, legal analysis from the Heritage Foundation. And Hans, always great to have you on. I want to talk about Donald Trump. It seems like he's batting 1,000 here with the Supreme Court. I'm sure it's not that good, but let's first talk about what happened on Friday with Donald Trump and Trump versus Casa. I thought this was a great moment for the president.
Oh, it was. No. Listen, the Supreme Court went out with fireworks, and it was a big success for Donald Trump. In Trump versus Casa, this was a case involving birthright citizenship, and that issue wasn't before the court, the substantive merit of whether Trump is correct in his interpretation of that. What happened was three different very liberal judges in three different states all immediately issued injunctions against the president, and there was an emergency appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And all three judges issued nationwide, or what the court calls universal injunctions, basically saying you can't enforce your executive order on birthright citizenship against anybody in the entire country.
Yeah.
And what the Supreme Court said was judges cannot issue universal injunctions. They have no legal authority to do that. I mean, they went all the way back to the original law passed by Congress setting up the federal courts and saying that was never authorized. And so, in essence, this affects this case, the birthright citizenship case, but it also affects all these other cases across the country. So, yeah, it was a big win. And you know what should shock people is this should have been a 9-0 decision, and yet it wasn't. It was 6-3, and the newest member of the court, Justice Brown Jackson, she just went off the deep end. I mean, she issued an emotional tirade that had absolutely no connection to the law or the Constitution.
One of the things that I thought, and Hans von Spakovsky is joining us, is I agree with you. I'm not a legal by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot has been made about not only Ketanji Brown Jackson and how she did go off the deep end, and she said basically how this was going to be the end of the legal system as we know it. Just hyperbole, stuff like that.
It is.
And so I loved, though, how Amy Coney Barrett said, we will not dwell on Justice Jackson's argument, which is at odds with more than 2 centuries worth of precedent, not to mention the Constitution itself. We observe only this. Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary. But the first part of that, we're not going to dwell on her argument because it is so insipid that it's not even worth our time.
No, that's right. That's true. And listen, I've heard some folks criticizing Justice Barrett for being so critical of Jackson. But listen, it tells you quite a bit. I think the other members of the court, even the liberals, are tired of her. Because think about this. Yeah, Justice Barrett wrote the decision heavily criticizing her, but it was signed on to by 5 other justices. Not only that, but the other 2 liberal justices, Sotomayor and Kagan, Sotomayor wrote a dissent that was joined by Kagan and Jackson, but neither of those 2 joined Jackson's dissent.
I was going to ask you about that. How big of a deal is that? I mean, what's the protocol? Is that a big deal?
Oh, I think it is. I think if they had thought she was making appropriate legal arguments, they would have joined her dissent, but they didn't do that. And I think that is a clear indication of the dissatisfaction with her. I got to tell you, listening to her questions this past term, she really was not qualified to become a member of the court. I mean, she is just doesn't have the competence necessary. Look, Sotomayor and Kagan, I disagree with their legal arguments, but they have the qualities to be on the court, even though I think they're often wrong. Jackson just doesn't, and she proved it in this dissent that she wrote.
So, is it safe to say that Ketanji Brown Jackson, what is, because I don't think she's qualified either. I mean, she couldn't even say, what a woman is. So
right.
What does this ultimately mean for the dynamic of the Supreme Court? It's clear she's out of her league.
Well, what it means is that she is never, ever going to be persuasive. Because remember, there's often a lot of give and take as the justices try to come up with an opinion. The Chief Justice is always trying to push to get as many of the justices as possible to sign on to an opinion. So sometimes there are compromises. And some of the justices in the past have become very influential in the other justices listening to them. She will never become influential because they don't respect her legal opinion. Now, Dan, keep in mind, important case, but listen, there were 2 other very big victories on Friday with the Supreme Court saying that states can and parents can and could protect their children.
Yes, and that was a very important one too. And remind me what the third one was.
Well, the other 2 cases, and by the way, of these 2 cases, one of them was a big victory, again, for Trump. I'll tell you why. There was a case out of Maryland, the Montgomery County School Board. They may be the most liberal school board in the country. And in 2023, they said to parents in the public schools there, we will no longer allow you to opt your children out of the courses have sexually explicit materials, and I mean sexually explicit materials on homosexual sex, transgenderism, etc. And listen, we're not talking about high school kids. This was being infused into kids all the way down to the pre-kindergarten level, if you can imagine that. And the reason, and the court came out 6-3 and said, you can't do that. Parents should have the right to opt their kids out of that. The reason this is a victory for Trump is that the Biden Justice Department, when they joined the case on the side of the school board.
Yeah.
The Biden administration said parents shouldn't be able to take their kids out. When Pam Bondi took over the Justice Department under Donald Trump, the Justice Department changed its position before the Supreme Court and came in on the side of the parents. Like I said, important decision. And then the third one was a case out of Texas. Texas passed a law telling pornographers who run pornographic websites, look, we're not telling you can't run a website like this, but we are telling you that you can't allow people into the website unless you verify they're adults.
Yes.
To keep kids out. And the pornographers got together, sued, saying, this violates our First Amendment rights. Supreme Court said, no, it doesn't. This is common sense, rational thing for a state to do. But again, a 6-3 decision. You know what ought to shock people, Dan, is that you have 3 justices on the Supreme Court that, one, think that you shouldn't be able to verify that somebody's not a 10-year-old kid going into a pornographic website, and 2, that parents shouldn't be able to opt their kindergartners out of sexually explicit material.
Okay, so, and that's going to lead me to my next question, which is, are these 3 justices, because we know that Amy Coney Barrett, she's sort of a wild card, right? You don't really know what she's going to do. But it just seems to me like with Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson, it seems like they are just going to be an automatic no. I want to talk about that straight ahead. I got to check the roads real quick on Super Talk 99.7. 47 as far as your weather goes today, a high of 90, scattered thunderstorms as well. Going to feel like about 97, 98 degrees. All right, so Hans, it does seem like those 3 are just going to be an automatic no.
Yeah, listen, anytime the issue before the court is a cultural, socially popular issue with liberals, they are automatically going to go for the liberal position, no matter what the law is. I mean, look, again, you saw that in these 2 cases on pornography at school boards, but we saw it again a week ago in the Tennessee versus the case versus involving Tennessee and Scrimeti. You know, when Tennessee passed a law protecting, again, kids from what essence is surgical mutilation and abusive drug treatments that are very dangerous, we had a 6-3 decision. You know, these 3 liberals said, oh, no, it's okay to mistreat children like that. Why? Oh, because of the whole gay liberation movement, transgenderism, that kind of thing.
Right.
And again, they just ignored the law and the fact that parents have a right to protect their kids.
All right,
and
so
the state does too.
Okay, so Donald Trump has about 3.5 years left. We have no idea what's going to happen in the midterms. We have no idea what's going to happen in the next presidential election. Knowing the makeup of the court, you know the Supreme Court a lot better than I do. So is there any prediction that someone may be stepping down, stepping aside, where this could be? I know there's some talk about Sonia Sotomayor maybe stepping aside. Are you hearing anything that would give the president another opportunity?
Well, Sotomayor is such a desperate liberal that she won't want to quit, no matter how sick she gets. If she gets sick, because she won't want to give Trump the opportunity to do that. I think they'd have to carry her out on her shield before she would leave the court. Now, Justice Alito, Justice Thomas. I mean, Thomas has been there 30 years. and he certainly is getting up there in age. I certainly hope he does not retire, and Alito either, because the two of them, in my opinion, are the best, most constitutionally focused judges on the court.
This might be an unfair question, but that's why I'm going to have it as my last question. What batting average do you think Donald Trump has with the Supreme Court?
I would say in this term,
yes.
Also including his first term, but this term, he's doing better than a majority. I think he's probably doing 7 out of 10. It's pretty good. The other big place he's been very successful is on the emergency appeals of these injunctions, particularly in the immigration area, where the court has come in and basically stayed or suspended the injunctions issued by these crazy left-wing district court judges. He's been very successful with that. Or you saw Court of Appeals even in California, the Ninth Circuit overturned a local judge saying, "Oh no, you can't take over the National Guard to try to stop riots in L.A." Yeah. All right, well, Hans, another great interview, and I really appreciate your perspective on these things, and I look forward to having you on again soon, because I have a feeling that we're going to be here for the next several years, dealing with all of these Supreme Court journeys. The president is going to continue to make his way to the Supreme Court with all of these various decisions that we're going to see coming down. And I love the fact that Hans said, yeah, President Trump, 7 out of 10. That's a 700 batting average, which, in case you don't know, that is very, very good. So we'll see how future decisions end up. It's, let's see, 7:52.